Morning, Greg. How are you, sir?
Morning. I'm all right.
Good. Oh, I'm very glad to hear it.
I realise I'm quite backlit today. This
It's
isn't
epic.
some new lighting thing. This is just the fact that
You've got a 1200D behind you.
Have a skylight up there, and occasionally when it's sunny, it pings.
I was going to say, because actually this is what, episode 60 something, and this might be the only time you've ever been backlit like this. That's how rare the sun is in the UK these days.
Yeah. As anyone can attest, this winter has dragged, and it's been a really cold and wet spring so far.
Mm-hmm. God, it has felt like, I think it's been the wettest 6 months ever on record, and it's just felt like it's gone on and on. And, you and I shoot on location a lot, right? So forever getting days moved, or like suddenly having to like try and figure out what like the next best alternative is. Is there a barn, or is there like a bridge or something we can go under? It's a bit like, oh God, it's just exhausting constantly having to think of it.
Yeah. I was camping at the weekend, and I basically spent all of yesterday just drying kit out on the line. Every bit of kit was just soaked from one night outside. It's just, it's rubbish. Anyway,
to be fair, though,
about the weather.
You're meant to use a tent.
That is true. I was just using a tarp. But
well, look,
I like the challenge.
Quickly, let's talk about shooting on location, because do you have any like tips and tricks for when you're out and dealing with inclement weather? When we talked about to Art Striber, we talked about turkey bags and stuff. I always carry black wrap. And I mean, I always carry black wrap regardless, but I carry like just bin bag, like really big, thick bin bags.
Rubble sacks or bin bags.
Because they can fold up really small and they weigh nothing. And in a pinch, literally put them over the packs or slam them over the heads and then clamp them, gaff tape them, whatever.
The heads of your assistants.
Heads of your assistants, yeah.
Because they've forgotten their rain jacket. Put this bin bag on.
But then, I've been known, I posted up a behind the scenes on my Instagram a couple of months ago of me gaff taping an umbrella to a C stand. There's all sorts of like little things that we do.
Kneeling pads. You can get really cheap foam kneeling pads that kind of fold down to being maybe A4 length and maybe 5 inches thick, wide, but they fold out, and you can either sit on them or kneel on them, because if you're doing anything kind of down on the ground, and to be honest, I'm getting to the age now where occasionally, I mean, it's not often, but occasionally on a shoot, I will like make sure I've got knee pads.
See, so knee pads, I think actually, this is going to sound like a mad thing to say, they're almost an essential part of the kit, but I went one step further. I went and got this.
Of course you did.
But this is from Panastore. So it's a Panavision branded, and it's called a grovel pad. So in the movie industry, they use a grovel pad, and you can sit on it or put stuff on it, or it's just a generally quite useful thing to have. But it is literally foam covered in like really dense tarp, and then obviously I spray painted my logo on, because I don't know if you can tell, but I'm a big fan of the old branding everything.
Is there any other industry that probably sells foam that's as expensive as the photographic or film industry?
How much would you pay for this lump of foam?
Oh, I mean, you're asking the wrong person.
Well, you could probably guess it. I think I paid like 40 or 50 quid for this.
Yeah. That's quite a lot.
And honestly, I spray painted the logo on, and you can. Oh, it looks amazing when I remember to bring it out.
You can get the photographer. You can get your clients to kind of stand on your logo, or sit on it.
They do love it. They do love doing that. But honestly, that thing's been brilliant because it's also wipe clean. Get your minds out of the gutter. It's when you put it down in the mud, you can then stick expensive kit on it in the middle of a field, and then it's literally you can just almost hose it off.
Yeah.
So it's quite good like that.
Yeah, I think having tarps is useful anyway. For like, you can get these super lightweight tarps. DD hammocks make a thing called the Featherlight tarp, which is, if you're into camping, is a great bit of kit anyway. But it's 3 by 3 meters, and it weighs absolutely nothing. It's really like strong material.
3 by 3 is a decent size as well. You could literally have a mountain of kit and just chuck it over and chuck some rocks or tent pegs in.
And it packs down into a bag about that big, so you can literally throw it over kit, or you can have it, folded up a couple of times and just put under you if you're lying down on the ground, or you need that barrier, that waterproof barrier.
That's actually quite a good tip. Actually, I quite like that.
But golf brollies are also useful just to have if you've got space for them. I've done the same. I've had to bungee and gaffer tape them onto C-stands overheads before. Especially with when you're dismal days where you're kind of shooting and you're using, say, like an HMI or a constant light source to create some fake sunlight. Quite often that thing will be sat on a C-stand out in the rain all day, or out in the grey day where it might be raining here and there, and you just kind of need to have something covering it. And with a C-stand, as long as you've got it sandbagged down enough, that umbrella isn't too much of a risk of kind of taking the whole thing toppling over. But you do have to obviously be mindful of that as well.
Yeah. No, fair enough. I mean, it's
when your Mary Poppins, your light, kind of look out the window and it's like, oh.
Anybody seen the aperture? Yeah, no, it's about half a mile down there, mate. But I bought possibly the most photographer's brolly from my local golf store, and I've chopped off the handle and
sprayed TB on it.
No, obviously no, but it's a bright. It's silver, so it's a completely reflective brolly.
Okay.
And then I don't know quite really what the advantage of that is, apart from
I'd say you'd probably be better to have black, wouldn't it? Surely.
But I kind of, at the moment of me purchasing, I went, oh, that's logical, because in a pinch I could use it as a reflector. Like, honestly, like, what is that logic? Anyway, so I chopped the handle off it and it fits into a grip head. But then I still need to gaff it and then do all of that stuff just to make sure it's like, because it turns out if you've just got a single point, they still take the wind like nobody's business. So, but shooting on location is always, I mean, I've got an entirely other set of wardrobe, like in a completely different set of wardrobe for shooting out on location.
What, like, kind of, what do they call it? Like oilskins, like North Sea fisherman kind of vibes. Big
exactly,
yellow.
Exactly that. It's a cross between a full-on dry suit and a hazmat suit. The full hood and everything. No, I have, like, because some of the locations we go to can be like, you probably go to slightly nicer locations. I've seen your work. It's wonderful. Some of my locations that historically I've been to have had things like, needles, broken glass, stuff like that. So I ended up getting a pair of reinforced boots with like a Kevlar, like anti-puncture thing in the sole. They are stiff as hell. But when we're working on building sites and things like that, you have to have a set of steels. You have to have the puncture proof. You have to have them. They have to be up to a certain ISO standard.
That is actually something that's quite, if you do, because week before last, I was shooting on a site which has a power station, and obviously you needed to have full safety, whatever. PPE, that's the word. So your high vis is, which, I have a high vis jacket, waist jacket that I shove in my kit bag anyway, normally, because it's useful to stuff on the end of a kind of protruding boom arm if you need to. B, it's sometimes useful if you're going to stand up a ladder to put it on, because then it looks like you're slightly more legitimate.
Of course.
And it's just a useful thing to have. But having the PPE, one thing is those steel cap boots. And I think it's sometimes if you're going to find yourself, like, I met a cameraman who worked a lot with the car industry, and he was having to wear steel cap boots all the time at factories and what have you. So he just invested in his own, because he'd far rather wear his own comfortable versions than what I had to do the other week and what I've had to do previously. I remember shooting in a shipyard in Germany in one of the largest, I think, if not the largest building in Europe for kind of in terms of inside space, because it had to fit 2 18-story cruise ships in there at once,
which are known to be quite small and compact.
And we were working on the ship that had no elevator, and so up and down those 18 stories in a pair of borrowed PPE hard steel toe cap boots on your own, and that is not a fresh, i.e. not broken in. Oof. It was like, it was blister central by the end of the day. So those are the type of things that actually, if you are going to be in those environments, it's sometimes worth just kind of getting a pair of your own.
Yeah, I mean, I bought, Digi, that we actually both know, Sam, he bought some Australian Blundells, I think they are called, and I was so impressed with them, I went out and bought a different brand in a different style. because they couldn't find them in my size. But that's I have monster feet. But yeah, I invested in my own, and they're only like £100, and they paid for themselves in comfort pretty much straight away on the job. Because when we were doing a 4-day shoot on a building site, and then all the crew had the box fresh stuff, and everyone was coated in blister plasters. And I'm there running up and down. I've spent a month or so breaking these shoes in, and that honestly sounds like a mad thing to say. It is 100% worth it to break the boots in properly around the house. Wear them all the time, apart from in bed. And it's honestly, it's like it's
just around in your dressing gown with your steel toe cap boots on.
Not to give the listeners like a really horrid image, but I was. Honestly, it's the best way to do it. And so so that's a decent tip. And sometimes gloves, sounds like a mad thing, but I bought a pair of photographer's gloves.
Yeah, well, a lot of gaffers have their own gloves, don't they? Especially, back in the day, less so nowadays, because you're less likely to be handling hot lights, maybe with the advent of LED. But back in the day, you had to have something that was a heat-resistant glove, because if you're handling hot lights all day, you're likely to be, getting burnt.
Oh, yeah.
So just having protective gloves for that was really important. I think still there's an argument to be had for having them on set.
I 100% think I still have in my kit bag a pair of riggers gloves, because just in case, I just want to, if I'm going to work ultra hard and get that set struck down super quick, I want to stick those gloves on, because then you know that you're going to have a bit of rubber grip. You're not going to drop stuff. It's not going to slip out or anything like that. You're not going to get sweat on them. But the pair I bought on this job back in January were by I'm going to get the name wrong. Pyeongtaek, I think. Okay. I don't know if that's how you say it. It does sound like a ricochet, doesn't it? Yeah. They were. I bought a pair from Sealskins years ago, and they had fingers here, and on the thumb. So your forefinger, your middle finger, and your thumb, and they had lift-off covers that would then have a little magnet on the top of the finger. So you could literally flip it back, the magnets would catch, and then you could literally have your whole hand really toasty and warm, and then have your main control fingers out of them.
So I use mitts for that, but same thing.
Oh, where you just pull them back and...
Yeah, so I have a pair of, I believe they are, they're not Sealskin, but they Sealskin do make them. It's another brand. I'll remember it, and if I'll put a link in the show notes to the ones I've got. But they, when I was in Lapland, minus 29 degrees, you needed to have 3 pairs of gloves, really. So you had a base layer,
like a merino,
merino that made by Patagonia, and they were kind of, you could still operate digital screens and stuff with them. And then the mitts, my mitts, and then on top of that, like snow gloves. And then, so when you were shooting, you take off the snow gloves. The snow gloves are just for when you were on the snowmobile, just because they added that extra kind of insulation against and wind chill kind of protection. And then the actual mitts themselves, you could have the ends on most of the time. Because the thing I found from working quite a bit in cold environments is if you've got mitts are much better at insulating your fingertips than individual gloves. As in individual finger kind of gloves, because
they're together and they can share warmth, right?
Exactly. Okay. So for me, the best compromise was to have the kind of thin layer underneath, then have mitts on top, so that your fingers are never actually fully exposed. Because the worst thing in the world is when you start to get like frozen fingertips and you're trying to work, and obviously you're handling a lot of metal and cold camera bodies and lenses and stuff. Yeah,
because the cameras are just out, aren't they? They're as cold as the environment.
So as soon as you touch them, they are just sucking any heat out of your fingertips, and you will start to just get to the point where your fingers become so painful that you lose dexterity, and then that's when accidents happen. That's when you might drop a lens. That's when you're fumbling around. You're not being able to control the settings on your camera. So that is super important on those kind of shoots, is to be like looking after your hands and making sure that those are kept as warm as they can be.
Very nice. I mean, it does really show the state of the weather here in the UK that I've just gone minus 29. Actually, doesn't sound too bad. So listen, we've had a couple of questions come in for anyone who doesn't know what we have got. So for people who support the show via our Patreon, which is patreon.com/exposed-negative. If you listen to the show regularly, you would have heard me and Greg drone on about this. But the reason we drone on about it is obviously it really does help us operate the show. But we have a really great private members. We can't really say that, do we? We don't. That just kind of has all sorts of like really negative connotations. Let's just say we have a private WhatsApp group for everyone who very kindly supports the show. It's the cost of a what is it the cost of now? Because it used to be the cost of a pint when I lived in Sheffield, but like
it's the cost of half a pint.
Yeah, so it's the cost of half a pint. That's a sad, isn't it? Like that is a sad situation that it'll only get you half a pint. But anyway, so it's barely anything a month, and it really helps the show kind of maintain its costs because it's kind of expensive. But it's a really great kind of really nurturing, helpful, supportive group full of some really nice people. So anyone in the group, obviously, there you go. There's enough smoke blown up. But, you know, when we come on and do these firesides, we will ask the group, you know, for questions and stuff like that. So, you know, Ed in the group has just asked, I'm currently rummaging through the kitchen cupboards looking for things to do a test shoot with. Do you have any quick and easy tips for getting interesting images out of everyday objects? Now, I can only say from a portrait point of view, but every now and then I'll shoot through stuff. So I'll find, you know, a bit of coloured sweet packing or, you know, a bit of kind of cellophane. Or if I ever kind of want to just distort the image slightly in camera, there's so much stuff around the kitchen. You can use, you know, a ramekin halfway up to the lens and kind of use it as almost like a bit of a flare box and stuff like that. There's so many things that you can do. Greg, I don't know, you are better at manipulating in that kind of way than I do.
I think if you find anything that can fire light through it, you know, like or allows light to go through it to some capacity, then it can be interesting to play around with that in front of the lens, and anything that's reflective as well. You know, think about kind of maybe not even necessarily putting something in front of the lens, but maybe trying to use stuff to actually create highlights and reflections and get interesting light out of that, especially on a day like today where you've actually got bright sunshine. If you've got a room in your house where that sun is pumping through, you know, use that as an interesting light source and try and get sort of something out of that by using, you know, reflectors and shiny materials and what have you. I think, yeah, it's not everyone's lucky enough to kind of have a place in their house where maybe that works. But if you are, and you know that you've got a room in your house where when the sun's out at a certain time of day, you're going to have nice light for a few hours, it can be really nice to set stuff up in a, you know, still life capacity. I did that actually in lockdown. You know, our front bedroom at the front of the house gets really nice northern light, and the windows are covered in a frosting, so it's diffused. And so the light that comes through there is just beautiful at certain times of the day. Is beautiful for kind of this soft light. And I actually shot a still life with some flowers, which of basically our wedding bouquet that had been saved and dried, and then printed it up, shot it against black.
Our wedding bouquet.
Yeah, did you not?
I don't remember. Well, this is news to me.
You were so drunk, Tom, that no wonder you never remember our anniversary.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
But anyway, so I think like if you can, you know, find things to get inspired by in your house, but also find a spot in your house that kind of inspires you, then or where you know your flat, wherever you are, then that is great. In terms of finding inspiration, I love nothing more, and I don't do it as much these days, but having a really good photography book to kind of sit down with in the morning and have a cup of coffee with and kind of like root through. And generally it's nice if you can get kind of an amalgamation of work. So I've got a really good one that Leica put out a few years ago, and it's kind of the history of the Leica cameras, but it's with all of the photographers through the ages and how they shot with those cameras. And there's some amazing work by photographers that I've never heard of, you know, in the 60s and 70s. And I guarantee that most people probably would never have heard of them. But you look at their work and you're like, how have I never seen this work before? It's amazing. And that's one of those books that I can just dip into at any time. And again, I'll link to it in the show notes. You dip into it at any time and get inspired by, like guaranteed to get inspired. So if you can find something maybe like that, but for still life photography, or for kind of food photography and stuff like that, it can really get those creative juices flowing, I think. Far more so. And this is the thing for me with a photo book, I can look through and get inspired, and I can spend my own time on. Whereas if I try and do that same, if I try and get inspired on social media, Instagram, for example, guarantee it won't work. I'll get distracted unless I go into my saved images where it's my curation. You will look at something and then 10 seconds later, you'll be distracted by some reel of a dancing nun or something, that pops up that's so unrelated. And before you know it, you've forgotten what you were looking at. And that's just the way it's designed to work. That, the algorithm in those apps now, unfortunately, that they
designed to hook you in.
Yeah, just keep feeding you things. Whereas a book, you can do it at your own pace. And so for me, like having a good photo book collection to go to, or at least having access to one, is a real kind of luxury and something to be treasured.
So obviously we talked about that in episode 60 with Emily May, right? And so I'm now trying to do that as much as I can, trying to carve out the time. Again, still feels hard work, but I am getting better at doing it. And I will admit that this morning, Greg messaged me at 9:05 saying, basically, where are you? And I was sat having a coffee with my newborn on my lap whilst he was being a bit sick on me. And I suddenly went, oh, do you know what? This is maybe not quite the relaxing moment I was trying to have. And then I totally forgotten the time, and it was not ideal. But yeah, if you want to hear more of that chat, obviously go back and listen to episode 60. Obviously, though, you're such a great listener that you've already listened to that and all the others, and you're in the group for supporting the show.
And you've liked and subscribed.
God, we don't half ask a lot, do we? So let's talk. So Ewan says, I'm just working out what to submit to the Scottish Portrait Awards this year. Now, let's talk competitions. So maybe some thoughts on competitions. I'd never entered one until the same one last year. Is there a point in doing it?
I'm useless at entry. I never enter competitions. I'm terrible at it. And I need to be better because you need to be in it to win it. But I am, and every year I'm like, this year I'm going to collate a calendar of all the events and I'll be really organized and get things ready. And it just never happens.
I do the exact same thing, and I have them in my diary, and then suddenly I'll be working on a job and I'll go, I should probably submit to the Sony World Photo Awards. Oh, it closed. Cool. Again, I've missed it. But when I've entered, I tend to do quite well, which is quite nice, and it's a bit of a boon. So, and you've won awards, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's
back when I used to enter.
Back when you used to enter. But like honestly, entering awards is I really support it. I think it's a great thing to do, as and when you remember to do it. Enter awards that are more relevant to your work. I do
have to say one caveat is there are an awful lot of awards, and some that not all awards are equal. There are some that are just like pure money-making scheme for the organisers, and I really don't think they're necessarily. But they play to people's kind of fragile egos.
That's right. So sign up to the Exposed Negative Awards.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree. There are some that are just simply not worth the internet they're written on. But for me, I try and enter the AOP, the Taylor Wessing. I mean, there's 0 point in me entering the Taylor Wessing. My work could not be further from a Taylor Wessing winning image, but I just like doing it because it makes me feel more of the community, like more a part of the community. Because I can be like, yeah, I enter Taylor Wessing. Never going to win. But I do the AOP, the Sony World Photo. So I used to enter a few others, but like you say, they're just not worth it. There's simply no point in doing it because what I would do is I would look at previous winners, and if there's names in there you recognize or the work is of a really good quality, then maybe look into it. And also speak to other photographers, see what they enter, and then kind of go, well, is there any point in me entering that? Is that relevant for my work and stuff like that? If you enter a competition where your work is more relevant, you stand a better chance of winning. Purely. Yeah. There's almost no point in me. Well, there is no point in me entering Taylor Wessing because my work is polar opposites of what wins in the Taylor Wessing.
Yeah,
But
yeah, definitely. Competitions have styles, and you have to kind of look at what's previously won and be quite strategic about entering the ones where you think you've actually got a chance. That's the part of the problem with competitions in my mind, though, is that they kind of they do tend to breed a certain way of seeing the world, or at least photographing, because they create trends.
and people shoot to win that particular competition.
Yeah, or they think, well, that's a good picture because that's one, therefore I need to shoot like that. And, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, but at the same time, it can lead to kind of quite generic, repetitive types of photography. And that's not necessarily, as I said, the problem with the competition. I just think that's the nature of the beast, isn't it? Like any kind of success, it sparks a kind of trend, and there's so many trends in photography that you see, and you can spot a mile off, and you see one person doing something really unique, and then before long you get kind of other people that are just aping that style because it's become popular, and that's just the way it is, isn't it? I think the difficult thing is if you're planning to have a career that's going to span a lifetime, is how you kind of negotiate that without following trends too deeply, so that your work becomes too kind of its time. I mean, we always joke, you look back at like the kind of late 80s, early 90s, and that kind of soft focus, Vaseline look on the lens. That was a look, and you look at pictures and you go, oh, that looks incredibly of that era. And I'm sure that people will look back at this kind of like cast color print trend that you see a lot in fashion, that again is starting to go to pro mists on lenses all the time to kind of give it that slight flare, and that will become another thing that really defines the images of being of this time. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but
I've had pro mists. I mean, currently I've put a pro mist on this lens, and you called me out for it the other day. but I have a pro mist on everything. I don't. I have pig iron quarters, and I have a pro mist eighth. But the quarters are for when I really need to go over the top. But the eighth I just use on absolutely everything. I don't know. I just really love what it does. So
I did it maybe for one or two shoots and then decided it wasn't for me.
Fair enough.
It really depends what you're shooting, isn't it, and how you're lighting stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah,
for me, it just adds like that extra element of like just so a lot of the time when I'm shooting stuff, I would love to be using a bit of smoke. And I would be I'd love to fill the room with haze. But say, for example, I'm shooting the CTO of Red Bull Racing, and I've got 5 minutes to get 5 different setups, and I'm in a warehouse. I can't do that with haze. So sticking the Pro Mist on the front basically just makes the lights bloom enough that it just adds that little bit of fakery or a little bit of atmos that I was kind of hoping for.
Yeah.
There's loads of little things that we do like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, maybe I should go back to the 80s.
I've often said that to you. I'm just looking at the other questions here. So we've got
it's erupted. I did not mean to. I just thought like we'd get like one person being like, "Hey Tom, do you use tripods?" But no, actually, it's become this big long thread. I'm like, okay, I was trying to keep up while we record. Let's go back to James's. James had a really good question the other day. Is that I don't shoot a huge amount of reportage event stuff, but how do you guys that do? How do you approach it? I mean, in terms of kind of the technicalities of setting the camera up for it. Do you shoot manual versus aperture priority and stuff like this? Now, I don't shoot any event stuff, but I do have a little Canon R6 with a 35mm 1.8 and a Pro Mist, obviously, that lives on my belt. I have a Peak Design capture clip, and it just lives on my belt or on a strap, or it's with me pretty much all the time. Ironically, apart from right now, so I can't dig it out. But the way I have that set up is auto ISO, fixed aperture in aperture in aperture priority. So I set that to wide open, and then I have the shutter speed and the ISO basically just free reigning, and then I use the control ring because it's an R6 and an RF lens. I use the control ring at the front on the front part of the lens to do the exposure compensation, or I can do it with my thumb, depending on what I'm, if I'm doing a one-handed shot or something like that. And so that for me has always been the best way of me setting my camera up to do that sort of thing. And I've always found it like ultra flexible.
Okay. I tend to shoot everything on manual. That's just the way I've always been, and occasionally miss shots because of it. Because I forget and I go between exposures. But as I have started to shoot a little bit more aperture priority with the little Fuji the X100V1, whatever we're calling it.
6?
Yeah, probably. X106
would make sense.
I do think they're calling it the V1 though, but I don't.
They're not, surely not. Like, it's Roman numerals.
I know it's Roman numerals, but it sounds better than 6. V1, actually, maybe not. Maybe that sounds like version 1.
Yeah, V1 be like, hey, look at this brand new camera that I've
got. Anyway, so I tend to shoot that with aperture priority. I never use auto ISO. I have to be honest. I don't like all the moving elements of I prefer to kind of know that there's one element that's going to be changing rather than, having auto ISO and also auto shutter speed and something, I like to kind of know where I'm at with things. But that's just me. That's just the way I've always done it.
I will say, when I do have it set up like that, for example, if I'm doing a behind the scenes shot or something like that, I am very careful about the auto. I set the auto limits on the minimum shutter speed and the auto ISO limits. And that's kind of important, because otherwise it can just run away with itself and go absolutely balmy. So pay attention to those shutter speeds limits and the auto ISO limits as well.
Yeah. We've had a question about print sales.
We have.
And that's partly because I've recently set up like a print store, and kind of people are interested as to whether or not that's something that's kind of working out. And so far, the kind of orders I've had have all been for kind of like private clients that run restaurants and kind of offices and stuff like that. And they're people I know, so they're kind of people that are have seen that it's gone up, and the people I've got existing relationships with. I've not made many sales yet to. I've not made any sales, to complete strangers as of it being set up and running for the last month or 6 weeks or so. And in terms of whether or not it's really worth it cost-wise, that's the kind of thing that only time will tell. I didn't really do it I wasn't expecting it to kind of run at a massive profit, if I'm honest. It's the type of thing that in the past I've had people wanting to buy prints, and I've had to kind of figure it all out and kind of do it on a case-by-case basis. Whereas now, at least, I've got kind of a shop front that I can send people to. And it allows them to look through, and if there's not something there that they want, then I'm still okay, we'll have a look. If there's anything particularly you've seen, then let me know and I can get it up onto the shop. And I find it's fascinating, because I have posted stuff in the past and people have kind of commented on Instagram, I'd love to have a print of this, or I'd love to see this as a print. And it's really hard to predict what that work is. I look at it and go, really? Which one is it you'd want to see as a print? Would it work as a standalone print? Because a lot of my work tends to be kind of projects. So it's more about kind of having multiple images of a project rather than a single defined photo. And so, for example, I've just done a run of 4 images from a story I did on the Mila Mila race in Italy for a restaurant. And it kind of works as a series of 4 images, because they kind of tell a bit of a story and there's a bit of a theme to it.
Is that a quad tip?
Yeah, because you get a diptych, a triptych,
and a quad tick,
and a pentip, and a hex tip.
I mean, at some point, it must just kind of just be a series of images.
Is a 7 a septip?
Maybe sept.
Doesn't sound good. See a doctor about that. No, so time will tell as to whether or not it's worth it. I think doing print sales is hard, unless you have a huge following online. of people, and you have to build that following up of collectors. And I think even the people that have that, it's still hard to turn a profit on a print, because if you get a good quality print, it costs a lot of money.
Sure.
Then you've then got to kind of add your profit margin on top of that. So you're not going to be walking away with a huge amount. And then if people then want to get that framed, I mean, that can cost the same amount again as the cost of the print.
Yeah.
If it's a big print, most of my prints for sale go up to pretty large sizes. We're talking kind of like, some of them are 70, 80 inches. So like, these are big prints.
And that's a big frame.
And that's a big frame and a lot of glass, and that costs, and it's heavy, and you've got to like get that done and get it shipped. So it is an investment for people. But I kind of wanted something there so that if people want to buy stuff, they've got somewhere to go,
But also the way you've done it is really clever, right? Because it's pretty much all automated. You upload the images and then it's all fulfilled externally, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a great way of doing it.
So it's little kind of work for me. Once it's kind of set up and running, in theory, it should take care of itself. But I think as photographers, there's, and it's totally dependent on the photographer. Each photographer is going to be different. But I think, work is meant to be seen in print. It's meant to be kind of like printed and looked at. And increasingly it isn't. It's not even in a magazine or on a printed page. It's just on a screen. Mm-hmm. And the value of photography, I feel like, is being kind of eroded slightly, because we spend less time actually looking at images on printed pages and spend less time physically looking at them because we're scrolling.
Yep.
And I do think that, like a lot of things, I kind of sometimes want to be able to slow things back down again, and have a bit more of a holistic approach to it. I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but yeah, just something where you're kind of actually appreciating looking at an image and exploring an image rather than wanting to quickly move on to the next one. And prints allow you to do that.
I think it's great. I mean, the thing is, your work very much suits prints. There's no point in me doing print store. Literally none whatsoever. My work doesn't really suit, unless you want a massive print of Jeremy Clarkson on a tractor or something like that. Like, people don't tend to want prints of that. So no offense, Jeremy.
You know what? I loved, you did a project on Elvis impersonators, and I thought there was some wicked shots there that would make for cool prints.
That was a lot of fun, actually. That was a lot of fun. I remember doing that one. Do you think they would make good prints?
There's one or two in there that I think would work really well. They were very graphic, kind of, yeah. So I don't think you should do. I think, yes, if you're going to be doing maybe portraits of people that are in the kind of media now, like, they're unlikely to be, people want to have them on their wall to some degree. Mm-hmm. It really depends, you go back to kind of looking at the golden age of like the 60s and 70s of celebrity culture. Somebody might want to have like a really iconic picture of Paul Newman or whoever, like Brigitte Bardot kind of on their wall. But it takes time for that to come around, doesn't it? Because at the time, they probably wouldn't have considered it. But it's only 30, 40, 50 years later that kind of stuff starts to become more of that particular zeitgeist and desirable in a sense of people looking back in a nostalgic fashion. So yeah. I think you can never write off and say, oh, no one would ever want it as a print, because maybe not right now, but and equally, like I said, like, prints speak to people in so many different ways, on a personal level, that you quite often just doesn't commute with other people. So like, what is important to one person is not going to be important to another person. You can never really predict what that's going to be.
That's true. So let's go back to the questions. What do we got? We got a question about agents. Now, we're not going to tackle this one because that's actually a full-on separate episode, and there's also a question about licensing. Again, full other episode that we need to do about that. Because
with the licensing one, I would say, if people want to listen, we did go into licensing a bit with Bill Kramer on that episode with Wonderful Machine. I can't remember what number that was.
That
Tom
was.
You had to look that up.
I'll look it up.
But we did touch on that. I do think that licensing is one of those issues which does need to be discussed, because it's somewhere where especially a lot of photographers that are kind of newer to the industry don't necessarily understand, and sometimes make mistakes that kind of cost them financially, or at least put themselves into a corner where then they're maybe being slightly more exploited than they should be.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think it's an area that is kind of at risk of changing for the worse for photographers, because of the nature of moving image and the way that that's licensed, and people not really understanding that stills are different to moving image. And, I was thinking about this the other day, because the thing you have to bear in mind when you're shooting stills is those images have actually probably far more use in the long term than a video does, because a video generally, or moving image, is generally a single edit, and that can be watched in only so many ways, and depending on how that's edited, it might not be suitable for X amount of things, whereas an image can be used in a myriad of ways,
Mm-hmm.
and a myriad of advertising, and a myriad of formats, print, online, digital, all of that. So actually, I think images themselves are intrinsically more valuable. Now, obviously, the nature of moving image and the fact that it involves more people means that production of moving image is generally far more expensive. So people then accrue the fact that that's expensive with the fact that that is giving them more value. And I'd say that that's not necessarily always the case.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure people would argue the toss on that. And I definitely think there are places where the video can be far more powerful and far more emotive, and of course. But I'm just saying, in general, I think stills have more power than some people realize, and have more monetary value than some people realize at first.
I'll go with that.
So I think that's something for people to bear in mind when they're pricing and costing their work and talking to clients, and why understanding usage and how you work that into your estimates, whether or not you roll it up with your day rate or whether or not you charge it separately, and that's coming down to trying to be, look at what the deliverables are, how many images they're asking for. Are you going to be charging usage on each of those images?
Mm-hmm.
Is the client going to be turning around and taking the piss and saying, right, we want 500 images, because you've just given us usage with your day rate rather than actually defining it per image?
Mm-hmm.
There's ways to kind of like break that down and to look at it and to be canny with it, so that you're protecting yourself, really, so you don't get exploited.
Mm-hmm.
And charging a fair price. And I think the reason it's so important for the industry and for photographers that are just getting into the industry to understand it is because, you could be doing yourself out of money, and also you're going to be then affecting the person behind you who then goes for that job, and they say, well, last time, they just gave us their copyright, whatever. Like, you've got to be mindful of where you stand on that. And I think if you look at the Association of Photographers, they've got a lot of information on this. Listen to things like the interview that we did with Bill Kramer, where we talk a lot about usage. Wonderful Machine have blogs where they go through usage. And I mean, granted, it's slightly different because they're quite big campaigns, and they're normally in America, which has, different budgets to what we have in the UK. But it's important to understand how they approach it. And I think the more professional you are about approaching it, and as long as you can understand it yourself and then explain that to a client in a coherent manner, that will put you in good stead.
Mm-hmm.
You're always going to get pressure to push back. But I know a lot of agencies that have been around for a long time understand usage and will be on the photographer's side when it comes to that. The difficulty is there's a lot of like newer agencies that come up through TV and film production that maybe have got a different idea of it, or like somebody who is questioning you from that client side who's, quite young themselves, and then maybe has not come up through that kind of industry and seen that.
Mm-hmm.
They don't necessarily understand it themselves. It's not me trying to be ageist, but it's just about people with experience within the industry and having come across it before.
Less about age and more about experience, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, cool. Well, that I agree. Makes total sense. The questions, I think we've pretty much covered. Well, there's loads more coming in, and there's now become a discussion about licensing and stuff. But listen, it's a really good group. We're in there all the time. We really like actually just waking up every morning and seeing that there's been 30 messages and going through and catching up, and it's a really just a nice group of people. So if you'd like to join that group, obviously sign up to our Patreon. We'd love to have you come and do an intro, and we'll try to make you feel as at home as possible.
It's really useful just because people put questions in, and like it's happening now, the other people are chirping in and responding from their experience. But the group's not too big, because what I've found is when the group's too big in these WhatsApp groups that you can get stuck in, where you've got like 100, 150 people in the group, I just stop reading the messages after a while because it's like
unmanageable. Yeah,
too much.
We always want it to be a manageable number, so it's that's the plan.
So, in terms of other things, then this week, one thing when we came on air, I was just doing my firmware upgrades, which was highly exciting. Firmware upgrades.
Let's talk about firmware.
I do love though that the Fuji firmware upgrades are great because they bring them out so regularly. They're constantly trying to kind of tackle little bugs or make improvements. Suddenly Fuji, the autofocus is working, twice as good as it was before.
Fuji have always been, I mean, that's obviously they believe in Kaizen, right? Which is incremental improvement. And they've been doing that forever until Fuji started doing it, or Fuji have just been doing it. No other camera companies, as far as I'm aware, ever kind of entertained that idea. And now...
Well, I think it's possibly also came with the territory of digital cameras becoming more computerized. Before you couldn't really bring out a firmware update for a Canon AE1, could you?
Not massively. No, that was a bit tricky. Yeah. All right, I see your point.
But I think that their approach to it, say for example, has been different to some of the big other camera manufacturers. I don't want to name names that maybe have not been so forthcoming with firmware improvements. And I think Fuji have realized that you need to be bringing them up because you are competing with a phone that is getting firmware updates all the time. So, you need to be... what's good about it is you can have kind of a camera that's 2 years old and they bring out a firmware update and it suddenly means that your camera is operating in a new way that it wasn't doing before, that's better.
I think the thing that I love most about that is what that really promotes is brand loyalty. There doesn't tend to be a huge amount of, I think when I grew up, I was Canon through and through until the advent of all these, the kind of the really kind of the big changes. I'm not going to go over all the changes I did again, but the big thing for me was noticing how many people at the advent of mirrorless were like, I've been Canon all my life, but now I'm going to go to Nikon or I'm going to go to Sony or I'm going to, there didn't seem to be a huge amount of brand loyalty, but now with the kind of what I'm trying to say is that regular firmware updates that improve the tools do kind of garner, proper brand loyalty. Some of the releases, Canon released a huge update for the R5 and the R5C that added so many great new features for me. I was just like, great, yeah, I'm set. Like someone asked me yesterday, they're like, are you going to move again? And I was like, probably never. Like I'm genuinely like happy, and one of the things is the regular firmware updates. I think it can't be a bad thing until the firmware update balks the camera, and then that turns out a bad thing. But that is quite rare.
I've never had that so far.
I've only ever had it once on not a Canon body. It was on a Sony, but that was a long time ago, and I think it was actually that I did something wrong. So
there was one other thing in there which will probably make a few people groan, but in the exposed negative chat. But I'm trying to. There we go. Don't need to say it now. Christopher put in it like get Greg to talk about his Leica. So, however, I do have something ridiculous that I got it for it the other day. I have a square hood lens hood on its way. They make kind of a metal replacement for the Summicron lens hood. So the Leica ones were always plastic for the old ones. For the kind of, because my Summicron, my 35mm Summicron for that is 1974, I think. It's from 1974.
Quickly, Summilux is the 1.4 lenses. Summicron is the f2 lenses. And
Summirit is a 2.8.
Right.
Summirit.
And then, that makes sense. And then there's the Vario range. If anyone wants to like a breakdown of how Leica lenses are branded, that is basically it. So if you ever wonder why they're called Summicron and Summarit and Summilux, that is to do with the lens speed. That is right, isn't it? I'm fairly certain that's right.
So you can now mock me for the most pointless thing that I bought for the Leica.
Is it the most pointless thing you've ever bought? Have you bought a blanking plate? You bought a blanking plate for the hot shoe?
Nope. It's a little thumb rest that folds out.
Dude.
Because when you have... So let me get the M6.
Dude, come on. Is that... So that's a digital Leica?
Yeah. So with the M6, this obviously is your shutter.
Yeah.
When it comes out, you hold the camera like that.
Oh, right.
So your thumb naturally rests.
Okay.
So this has been designed by a company in Hong Kong called IDS. And it's not cheap. I'm quite ashamed of that. It is brass.
How much was it?
I think the thumbs up ones are about 150 just for a thumb rest. This was more. 100. That's all I'm willing to say.
100. Yeah, what? It was more?
Yeah. And I might sell it. It was a moment of madness.
For real? You might sell it?
Just the thumb bit.
Oh, right. Okay, right. But
because they're custom, they're made to order. So at the moment, they're still quite hard to get hold of. So I've kind of got the advantage of being able to kind of sell it in the UK. And
did I see though that on the latest digital bodies there is a
most pointless thing I've got? But
I mean, I kind of like it.
It is quite nice.
I do kind of like it. But 150. I mean, the thing is, you're speaking to the man who's wasted the most amount of money ever on equipment. So, actually, 150 quid sounds like an absolute steal.
The problem with anything Leica is it's like take a sensible price and then quadruple it,
right?
And then you'll be hitting what it's going to cost you.
I mean, that is one of the reasons I did leave the Leica ecosystem. Is that anything for it suddenly just became.
Yeah.
It wasn't, it was all lovely stuff. Don't get me wrong. When you've owned a Leica and people who own Leicas and who have owned Leicas, they'll totally understand it. There is something about it, and the machining is amazing on all the stuff and the accessories. But like, I dropped a lens, and the repair quote blew my mind. Yeah. I was just like, wow, this
is always the thing that I find hilarious, because obviously back in the day, these were, photojournalist tools.
Which would get smashed up.
Yeah, they'd get smashed up. But also, like, if someone knew the value of a Leica, you're very likely to get mugged for it. I mean, it's the cost of a, Rolex, basically. And people have been mugged for less. So I think, the joke of actually being able to use this as a journalist now is kind of like, really? I think they've been a victim of their own success. They've become kind of a luxury brand. This camera is hands down my favorite camera ever, and I will never sell it. I will pass this down if I can, if it's still working.
Is that the M6?
The M6, yeah. It's such a perfect camera it's not perfect, but it's got its idiosyncrasies, but I absolutely love it, and I always have. And I love shooting with it.
Did they do two versions of the M6, one with metering and one without, or was it just that the M6 had metering? I can't remember.
You have the M6 and the I think they did. TTL. I cannot remember. Yeah, there is this is the TTL version.
So that's got
and I think there was one without. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
They then brought out, obviously there was the M7, which didn't have a vast amount of improvements, I don't think. And then you start to became digital, like on the M9. Or was the M8? I can't remember. Anyway, they're now up to the M11.
To give you a bit of a backstory, the M8 was the first digital rangefinder, not the first digital rangefinder, because I'm fairly certain Epson bought out the RD1, I think it was.
RD1, yeah.
Legendary camera. Did you see the interesting story about them? They found a load in storage of original RD1s, and then they basically, I can't remember what they did with them, but I think they auctioned them off, or they basically made them as a prize, but they found this box of pristine RD1s from the factory, and they cleared them out somehow. I tried to register for one, but didn't work. So, but the M8 was the crop sensor on the rangefinder, and that was the only crop rangefinder Leica did. Then there was the M9, and all of these have had M8, M8P, M9, M9P. Then there was the M240, because they jumped. The naming convention went a bit weird, and then they've done the M10 and the M11, right? And the M11, does the M11 have the thumb grip built into it? I remember seeing
so what it is, it's the D version. So the D version doesn't have a screen, and it has that kind of cocking lever type thing, which is a thumb grip.
Now, I owned the M262D, and that was the first Leica without a screen. And there's something amazing about the experience of shooting that. But I could not, because I decided, I was just like, I'm on a Leica, I'm going to shoot everything at 1.4. And turns out that's hard. That is really hard. Nothing was ever in focus, like ever.
So actually, if you listen to one of our previous guests on the show, a friend of the show, Justin Mott, you can look him up on Instagram. He is a big proponent of shooting with the Ds. He shoots a lot of his work, the kind of wildlife stuff that he does about endangered species and stuff is all shot on a D. I'd have it so that I have a case on mine that flips down, so the screen is kind of hidden away most of the time.
Oh, that's quite nice.
And that just, A, it protects the screen, but B, it kind of prevents me from, or it at least discourages me from chimping too much.
Yeah, fair enough.
But anyway,
cool.
It's a silly vanity project having a camera like that to some degree. I think that there is a certain look to them, but I do think that it is overrated, and I'll be the first to put my hand up and say that. And knowing what I know now, would I still like? Possibly. I think when I bought the camera a few years ago, like pre-COVID, things were definitely busier, and in my head, I could justify the costs. Now, I don't think I would. But I do love that camera, but it is a love-hate relationship. Whereas the M6 I love, but I just don't shoot film that much.
Sure.
In fact, I've just got 3 films just about to be sent off to the lab, but it's taken me probably 6 months to get through 3 rolls of 36 film in 3 different cameras, just because
you have to remortgage, to be fair, to get the films in the first place, and then
to buy the films.
Yeah.
I mean, film costs now are getting to the point where Polaroid costs were a few years ago, when they were kind of running out of stock. It's insane. It's
absolutely ludicrous. Like, I really feel for everyone who is shooting on film, because it's just like the cost of it is just absolutely unbelievable.
It's such a shame, because it becomes exclusionary, like people can't afford to do it. And that shouldn't be the case. Photography in itself is meant to be quite a democratic medium, and it is in many ways, but the thing that really holds people back is just the cost of it, and the cost of film is one of those big kind of factors that some people just can't justify.
Well, how much is like a roll of portrait now?
Oh, I don't know. It was the local, like, it's like looking at crypto, looking at cost of fluctuates so much. What's it saying for 35mm portrait? So it's about £9 or so, is it?
How do you think it's £9?
Yeah, roll if you buy it in bulk.
So here on Amazon tends to be like relatively cheap, right? So you can buy it on Amazon for £25 for a roll of 36 exposure portrait 400. Yep. Or you can buy it from Analog Wonderland and that is 35mm Kodak portrait 400, £19.50.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, that's just insane.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure, don't get me wrong, I fully love, if do you want to see, well, I don't know, if anyone doesn't want to see, look away now, but, this is how much I used to love film. I have a roll of film tattooed through my neck. Like, that's the first time I've ever shown that in public. So, well, not in public, but, not in closed doors. I was very young. I needed the money, and I was on tour, and we all got horribly drunk and ended up with through the neck tattoos. So it's a thing. But that's how much I used to love shooting on film. That was my go-to thing. And now, and I'm, been doing this a long time. I can't justify that.
Yeah.
You know, I have a Hasselblad that I shoot, but that's a treat for me to go out and shoot with it. You know, I don't. You know,
I tend to find myself shooting. If I'm shooting film, I'll be shooting it in formats that I can't replicate in digital that easily. So, for example, my wide lux. I mean, my X-Pan, you could argue just crop a photo, but it's not quite the same.
No.
So, you know, I shoot a bit with the X-Pan. I just had a commission recently, and I shot a roll through the X-Pan just out of interest. So that's going off to the lab. The wide lux, that film normally sits in there for months at a time as I slowly go through, kind of getting a shot here or there. Maybe if I do a travel assignment, I might take it with me and get two or three frames with it. And then there's normally film in that M6 and maybe one in the Contax T2. But again, those films will then sit in the camera for a year.
Yeah.
Because it takes me that long to kind of... The thing I find is if I'm working in the UK, I will maybe take more cameras with me than if I'm traveling. If I'm traveling, obviously you're limited then by what you can carry with you, or you carry on going through film scanners, all of that kind of stuff. So the film cameras don't tend to travel with me as much as I'd like them to. I'm always amazed when I see photographers who do shoot exclusively on film, you know, and maybe they shoot with Pentax 6.7s and they have to have 4 of them because they're so prone to breaking down that they need to have spares. That, you know, they have to travel with that on planes. I'm just like, how do you do it?
No.
In fact, there is a few guests that I want to get on that do that, and hopefully if we can get them on board, then we can put that question to them, because I'd love to know the logistics of working in this day and age with film.
Yeah. And constantly asking for hand searches at all the airports and stuff. Tell you what, though, arguably the Pentax 6.7 had possibly...
for the film.
Yeah, for the film. Pentax 6.7, arguably the best shutter sound ever.
Yes. Yeah.
I would say...
ASMR right there.
ASMR right there. You know, I think my Hasselblad's got a pretty great shutter sound, but nothing compared to the 6.7. I want to get one just to literally have on my desk as a bit of a plaything, but it seems a bit overkill.
I mean, the Leicas are...
Nah. Sorry, man.
It just feels so nice.
Yeah. It's the whole thing about Leica is that they're meant to be like quiet and discreet, right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is now, back in the day, they were quiet and discreet with relation to what everything else was on the market, but now you have electronic shutters, which are utterly silent.
Yeah, completely. Which is always weird. And then you have the border that shows that you've taken a picture around the image. I'm like, don't know, is that landed? No.
I much prefer to have some form of haptic feedback to let me know that the frame's actually fired. You know, electronic shutters that are totally silent freak me out a little bit, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I'm with you. Listen, we're over the hour mark, so we should probably wrap this one up. Now, where can people find you and find the show?
Well, people can find the show at http. There, we're at www.exposenegative.com. We are on Instagram at xnegative. You can find myself on Instagram at Greg Fennell, which is GREGFUNNELL, and you can find Tom at tombarnes.com, which is spelt out.
Yeah.
So no actual dot, it's DOT.
DOTCOM. And yeah, thank you very much for listening, and come join us in the Patreon group. So you can sign up at patreon.com/expose negative // Right, come on, dive in. And on that, bombshell, we should leave you to it. We'll see you on the next
time. Take care, guys.